Maybe you still remember the sound of his paws walking around the house. It wasn't tall. It wasn't something that really attracted attention. But today, the silence that replaced that sound seems deafening. The house remains the same. The furniture is in the same place. The routine, somehow, continued. But there is something that has never been the same again. And maybe, while you're here now, there's a part of you that still hopes to hear that sound again. As if, for a second, he might appear at the door, like he always did. Now let me tell you something in all sincerity. This video is not just about loss. It's about something that almost no one explained to you when he was gone. It's about understanding why some dogs, not only did they live with their owners, but they gave something much greater. And that completely changes their fate. And maybe it will change the way you see what happened to yours. If you've ever lost a dog, or feel that that bond was never something common, this video can give you something that many people spend their entire lives looking for: a sense, a meaning to that connection that felt different, a meaning for that look that said everything without saying anything, and mainly, a meaning for the match. Because there is a question that almost no one can really answer. Why do some dogs seem to leave after doing something for us? Maybe you've already experienced this. Maybe he stayed by your side in a difficult time. Maybe I protected you. Perhaps it was the only presence when no one else was there. And then, somehow, he left, as if I had accomplished something. What if I told you that this might not have been a coincidence, that there are bonds that don't begin in this life, and they don't even end when the body is gone? Today, you will understand why some dogs, when they choose to stay, they are actually doing something much bigger than just living next to you. They are fulfilling a role. And in some cases, giving one's life completely changes their spiritual path. But first of all, I want you to think about something very simple, a single question. Have you ever felt like your dog understood you in a way that no one else could? Because the answer to that, it could be the beginning of something much bigger than it seems. And what will you realize from now on? Maybe it will change not only the way you see loss, but the way you understand the love that existed between you. Because that sound of the pause, maybe it was never just a sound, and in the next moment, you will begin to understand why. He followed you around the house, even when you didn't realize it. You went to the kitchen, and there he was. He sat on the sofa, and a few seconds later, he sat down nearby. Even on the most ordinary days, he seemed to choose to stay right where you were. At the time, it just seemed like affection, company, routine. But today, looking back, it starts to look different, as if he wasn't just close to you, but watch out for you. Maybe you also remember something else. That exact moment when you arrived home. It didn't matter the time. It didn't matter what day it was. He knew. Before the key even turns, before the gate even opens, he was already there, waiting, as if there were a connection that didn't depend on sound, nor visible signs. And the most curious thing is that this doesn't just happen to you. Many people report exactly the same thing. As if your dogs are in tune with something deeper, something that goes beyond what we can explain logically. And maybe, just now, some pieces will start to fall into place inside you. Because it wasn't just about playing. It wasn't just about company. It was about presence. Real presence. The ones who notice when you're feeling bad, even without you saying anything. The ones that are closest, on the days when you need it most. There were people who told something they never forgot. One person said that, before one of the most difficult moments of her life, the dog started acting different, quieter, more stuck, more attentive, as if he was anticipating something. And in the following days, something really happened, and he didn't leave her side. Not for a second. Now think calmly. How many times has your dog approached, just when you weren't well? How many times did he remain silent by your side, as if you were respecting something that you couldn't even explain? This is no coincidence, and maybe it never was. There is something about the bond between humans and dogs that is not built just through coexistence. It's like a type of recognition, as if, on some level, you already knew each other. And that would explain something that a lot of people feel, but don't know how to put into words. The feeling that that dog, it wasn't just a dog, it was different, special in a way that is difficult to explain. And when you start to see it that way, some simple behaviors take on another meaning. Follow you around the house. It wasn't just attachment. Wait at the door. It wasn't just anxiety. Stay silent by your side. It wasn't just tranquility. Maybe he was careful. Maybe it was conscious presence. Maybe it was part of something that was being built without you noticing. And here comes something important. Because when a bond is this deep, it is rarely random. He has purpose, even if at that moment you can't see it. Now tell me something, and answer it sincerely within yourself. What if he was never by your side by chance, but because he needed to be right there, with you? Because if that's true, so everything that happened after, it can also have a much greater meaning than it seems. And that's exactly what starts to appear when we look at the moment when everything changes. There are stories that don't seem real until you realize that they are repeated in different places, with different people, but with the same pattern. One such story came from someone who had never spoken about it out loud. She said it was an ordinary night. Nothing out of the ordinary. The house was silent, and the dog, as always, was nearby. But that day, he didn't behave the same way. He didn't lie down. He didn't relax. He walked from side to side, as if he was restless. At first, she thought it was strange, but he didn't pay much attention, until he started to insist. It approached. He pushed lightly with his nose, stared. That look, the same look you've probably seen. But that day, there was something different, more intense, more urgent. She decided to get up, and it was exactly at that moment that everything has changed. A few minutes later, something happened inside the house, something that could have been much worse if she hadn't left that place. She never forgot what she felt afterwards. It wasn't just relief. It was a mixture of shock, with a feeling that was difficult to explain, as if he knew. In the following days, he got even closer, calmer, but always close, as if he was watching. And then, a short time later, he left. No clear warning, without a reason that made logical sense. And that's when the pain really came, because along with the longing came a question that hadn't left her head. Why? Right after that? And maybe this question also makes sense to you, because there are moments in which it seems that the dog stayed until he accomplished something, as if it had a function, as if it were there for a specific reason. And then, it just was. This shatters any attempt at a simple explanation, because it doesn't fit the idea of chance. It doesn't fit the idea of, it was just his time. It seems something more targeted, more intentional. And that's exactly what many people are beginning to realize when they look back. They don't just remember the happy moments, they remember what happened near the end, of different behaviors, greater proximity, of a kind of presence, more intense than ever, as if he was aware of something. Now pay attention to this, because this is the point where a lot of people feel the pinch, but they also start to understand. Maybe He didn't stay until the end by chance. Maybe he stayed until he finished what he needed to do. And that changes everything, because when you look at it from that angle, the pain continues to exist, but it starts to mix with something new, meaning. And this is exactly where a lot of people get stuck. Why accept this? It's accepting that that bond was deeper than it seemed, that maybe there was some kind of mission there. And this creates an internal conflict that is difficult to ignore, because if that's true, so his departure, it wasn't just a loss, it was a consequence of something bigger. Now think calmly. How many stories have you heard, or even lived, in which the dog seemed to act differently, just before leaving? This is not rare. In fact, it's more common than it seems. And maybe there is a reason for this that no one has explained to you yet. And it's exactly about this silence, this emptiness that remains after, that we need to talk about now. After he was gone, the house was different. It's not something that can be explained easily, because, on the outside, everything remains the same floor, the same furniture, the same place where he used to lie. But inside, it feels like something has been removed. Maybe you still avoid looking directly at that corner, or maybe you look, hoping to feel something. The place where he slept, it's still there, but it's not the same anymore. And the strangest thing is that it's not just nostalgia. It's a kind of silence that weighs. A silence that seems to fill the spaces where life once existed. You walk around the house, and for a second, you almost expect to see him following you, or hear that faint sound of paws coming from another room. But it doesn't come. And this not coming hurts in a way that no one prepares us to feel. Because it's not just the physical absence, it is the absence of something that seemed gift, loyal. There are people who say that the worst moment, it's not the day of farewell, it's the next day, when everything continues, but he is no longer there. The dish may still be in the same place. The routine tries to follow, but the house doesn't respond in the same way. And that's when something starts to happen inside you. A mix of pain with confusion, because at the same time you know he's gone. There's a part of you that feels that he's still there. Not clearly, not visibly, but as a sensation, a type of presence that cannot be explained logically. Some people report things they never had the courage to say out loud, like hearing something soft on the floor at specific moments, or feel that they are not completely alone. Others say they dreamed about the dog in a very real way, as if that meeting wasn't just an ordinary dream. And maybe you've already been through something similar, or felt something you preferred to ignore, because it's hard to understand, and even more difficult to accept. But there is an important point here, because this silence that remained, it is not completely empty. He carries something, memory. Yes, but maybe not just that. Maybe he carries presence. Just not in the way we are used to recognizing it. And this is exactly what creates the internal conflict, because a part of you wants to follow, wants to accept, wants to understand that it's over. But another part can't believe something so strong. It simply ceased to exist. And in the midst of this, a feeling that is difficult to name arises. What if it's not over? This doubt doesn't come from nowhere. It is born from the bond, the intensity, the way he was with you. Because when something is really deep, now think honestly, what inside you still resists accepting that he simply disappeared? Because this resistance, it may not be weakness, it could be perception. And maybe this silence that no one explains be precisely the beginning of something that almost no one taught you to see. Because there is a different way of understanding this absence. And when you start looking down that path, the the starting idea, completely changes its meaning. There is a way to look at all of this that completely changes how you feel now. It doesn't erase the longing. It doesn't lessen the pain, but it transforms the meaning. Because for a long time, we were taught to think that life ends when the body stops, that the presence ends, and the bond ends there. But when it comes to certain bonds, especially those that involve true love, this logic begins to fail, especially when we're talking about them, of the dogs that not only lived by our side, but they chose to stay, even when they didn't have to. You remember everything he did for you, the simple moments, the difficult days, the way he always seemed to be there, at just the right moment. Now look at it another way. What if none of this was random? What if that bond didn't start the day you found him? And more, what if the way he left, wasn't it by chance too? There is an idea that appears in different cultures, in different accounts, and even personal experiences that many people avoid sharing. The idea that some animals, especially those who create very deep bonds with humans, they are not just living an ordinary life. They are participating in something bigger. And within that, there is something even stronger. Because when a dog puts itself at risk, when he protects, when he stands by in critical moments, this isn't just instinct. It could be choice, and choice carries intention. Now pay attention to this, because this is one of the most important points of everything you've heard so far. When there is love, true, deep, without change, it doesn't go away. This evolves. And some bonds evolve in such an intense way that go beyond what we understand as ordinary life. It's like that dog, by connecting with you, had accessed something greater within him. And in some cases, when he gives his all, when he gives himself completely, this does not end the journey. This transforms the journey. This is where the view changes. Because instead of seeing the match as an end, you start to see it as a transition. Not by absence, but in form. Presence is no longer physical, but it does not cease to exist. And maybe that's why so many people feel that they are still around, not like before, but in a different way, more subtle, harder to explain, but still present. And this connects with something that you may have never stopped to think about in depth. Some dogs don't just pass through a human's life. They mark the soul, and when that happens, their bond is not limited to the time they spent together here. He continues, otherwise. Now remember what you felt back then, the way he looked at you, the way he was close, in the way he seemed to understand, without you saying anything. This is not common. This is not superficial. This is a bond of essence, and bonds like that do not follow common rules. Therefore, perhaps the greatest pain comes from precisely this, because deep down you feel like it couldn't just end. And maybe you're right to feel that way, because when a dog gives his all for someone, when he gives himself completely, this does not diminish his existence. This expands, it elevates. And that's exactly which begins something that few people have the courage to consider. Their spiritual destiny may change, and in the next moment, you will understand what it really means. There is a point where everything starts to make sense in a different way, not because the pain goes away, but because it stops being just pain and begins to carry meaning. This is where many people report something very specific. One moment, not necessarily something visible, not necessarily something you can prove, but a moment when the feeling changes, as if, inside, something said, he didn't go away like you think. It can happen in silence. It can happen in a dream, or even on an ordinary day, without anything special. But when it happens, it doesn't seem like imagination. It feels like recognition. And that completely changes the way you see everything. Because until then, you were trying to deal with the absence. But at this moment, you begin to notice presence in a different way, more subtle, deeper. And perhaps this is where the phrase that many people only understand after experiencing it comes in. Some dogs don't leave, they just stop being seen. Keep that. Because this phrase is not about denying reality, it's about expanding it. It's understanding that what existed between you, it didn't just depend on the body, it depended on the bond. And bond, it doesn't disappear. He transforms. And when you accept this possibility, something inside you begins to reorganize itself. The longing continues, but it stops being an empty weight and begins to become a bridge, a call. Now think with me. How many times have you felt, even if for a second, that he was still around? It might have been a small detail, a habit you repeated without realizing it, an impulse to look at where he used to be, or even an inexplicable feeling of company. These moments are not necessarily coincidental. They may be echoes of a bond that was not interrupted. It just changed shape. And this connects directly with what we talked about before, about dogs who give their all. Because when there is total surrender, what happens next? Nor does it follow a common path. It's as if that connection had enough strength to continue existing, not in the way you're used to, but in a way that requires another perception. And maybe that's why some people say they feel their dogs, especially at times when they need it most, as if they were still fulfilling something, still present, still connected. Now let this question stay with you, without rushing to answer. What if the love he had for you is too strong to just disappear? Because if that's true, so maybe he never went as far as you think. And at the end of it all, this completely changes the way you understand that memory, that sound, that emptiness. Because maybe, don't be empty. And that's exactly it. That begins to reveal itself when you look again, at the beginning of it all, maybe you still remember the sound of his paws walking around the house. At the beginning of this video, that memory seemed to hurt. It seemed to mark his absence. It seemed to reinforce the silence. But now, I want you to look at that same memory in another way. Not like something that disappeared, but like something that maybe never completely went away. Because when a bond is true, it does not depend only on physical presence. He leaves marks, and some marks don't fade over time, they change shape. Maybe today, you no longer hear that sound in the same way, but it may be that at certain times, you feel something difficult to explain, a memory that comes stronger, a feeling of closeness, a moment in which the house seems less empty, and it doesn't need to be seen to be real. Because what you experienced, it wasn't common, it wasn't superficial, and deep down, you know it. You know by the way he looked at you, you know by the way he followed you, you know by the way he was there when no one else was. This type of connection does not fit into simple explanations, and maybe it was never meant to fit. Now there is something important that you need to understand. When a dog gives himself completely away, when he gives his all for someone, that doesn't end his story. This expands. This transforms. It's as if that love opened up new paths that we still don't fully understand. But feel and feel. Sometimes S is truer than understanding. Maybe that's why some people say that their dogs returned in some way. Not necessarily in the way we expect, but in moments, in signs, in sensations, as if they still found a way back. And here comes something that connects a lot of people who are watching this right now. Because when you share this experience, you realize you are not alone. There are other people that they also felt, who also lived, who also realized that that bond did not end. So I want to make you a simple invitation. If at some point you felt something you couldn't explain after he left, right here. Because when you talk about it, you not only validate what you lived, you help other people understand that they are not alone. And maybe this is also part of something bigger. Now, before I finish, remember that first image? The sound of paws around the house. Maybe today, you no longer hear with your ears, but maybe you start to perceive differently, in memory, in sensation, in the bond that continues to exist. Because some encounters do not happen by chance, and some ties, they don't end when they seem to end. They continue, in silence, in a way that only those who lived can feel. And maybe, right now, there is a part of it, still walking by your side, even if you can't see it.